Hello, everybody. This is the Shoehorn podcast on the Indianapolis Colts on SI.com YouTube channel, Horseshoe Huddle. We've got roster cuts today. So I'm just kind of hang out, let you guys get in here for a little bit because it's going to be a lot less of a podcast today and a little bit more of just a straight up, let's blow off some steam. Let's chat about what's going on with the roster moves, kind of what we expect going forward for waiver claims, what positions they might add at. Who they kind of want to sneak onto the practice squad, or who you're hoping gets passed up through all the waiver claims that are going on tomorrow and kind of sneaks onto that practice squad. A couple of big names for sure. I wouldn't say that there's anything too out of the ordinary, too surprising. There wasn't anything that was mind-blowing this year, which is kind of what we expected, kind of going into the roster cuts at the end of the preseason. We were looking at this roster, just trying to pick it apart. And for the most part, most of the positions are pretty straightforward. Last week, I put out a piece on horseshoehuddle.com, just kind of the questions that needed answered. And they definitely got answered today. I guess the big one, we'll start with the big one, which I think was the most surprising, was Evan Hull being waived today. Kind of the question going into today was whether or not they were going to keep 4 running backs or they were going to keep 3 running backs. On my show on Friday, we went over if they were to keep 3. I kind of thought that Tyler Goodson would be the guy over Evan Hull. So Evan Hull seems to be the most dramatic reaction that people have had to the cuts. But if the most dramatic reaction you're having to your cuts is running back 4, I think you're kind of in a pretty good spot. And you're not really hanging your head too much over what went down today. What do you guys think? Anything crazy exciting? Were you guys expecting Tyler Goodson to be the guy running back 3? Were you expecting him to keep 4? I kind of thought when the tight end situation cleared itself up with Jelani Woods going on IR, which is another thing we need to hit on, that they would have the room to keep 4 running backs. But I guess, they're comfortable going in with 3, and they must be really comfortable with how Trey Sermon's progression is going along with his hamstring injury. If they're confident going into week 1 with only 3 running backs. Hey, Cody in the chat. Jason Bean, definitely a hot topic also. I think there was a little bit of buzz right before roster cuts came out that Bean was going to be quarterback 3, or he was making the roster. Some source of somebody that knew something about, or someone indirectly or directly related to the Kansas program that might have had some inside knowledge, but kind of saying that Bean has made it or implying that, but that turned out not to be the case. I think maybe without that today, kind of skewing how people were looking at Jason Bean, I think what we mostly expected was that he would be like that top candidate to be the practice squad guy. We talked about the quarterback position for a while with that emergency quarterback rule and kind of the confusion surrounding that, whether it could be a guy that was called up from the practice squad during the season or if they had to be on your active roster. It ended up being somebody that had to be on the active roster, making 3 quarterbacks a lot more likely to be on the roster. Ellinger's just kind of been that guy, that third rock steady quarterback. I expected them to keep Sam Ehlinger instead of Jason Bean, just because I think how long he's been around in the organization. And you've got Anthony Richardson, who's essentially going to be playing in his first full year. I think you would like somebody in that quarterback room who he's familiar with. It was during that preseason game, the third preseason game, when he threw that pick to Kylan Granson and that miscommunication. After he talked to Granson, the first guy that he went over to on the sideline was Sam Ehlinger. So he's discussing kind of those ups and downs with him and kind of getting his take on it. So it seems like, if nothing else, if you're not expecting to play a third quarterback during the season, which hopefully the Colts aren't in a situation where that's going to have to be the case, you want somebody in that room that is going to kind of help with the development and make Anthony Richardson more comfortable. And I think Ehlinger would be that guy over Jason Bean. But definitely practice squad eligible, practice squad candidate. You kind of worry if he's going to be someone that's getting claimed. There's definitely a couple of teams around the NFL right now. I know the Packers, the Bears, both rolling with 2 quarterbacks right now. So if they decide to go with a third quarterback, Bean's going to be sitting there right for the picking on the waiver wire. Sarah in the chat. Hey, Sarah, saying Evan Hull was a shocker, and so was Micah Abraham. Yeah, Evan Hull was definitely kind of the big one that everyone's been talking about. On my piece last week for Horseshoe Huddle, I was writing about how one of those questions that we needed to answer was whether or not the rookie corners were going to make the roster. And I didn't think that it was as big of a slam dunk as some people were saying. You've got guys directly battling at each role. So you've got Micah Abraham, who you brought up, Sarah, who was kind of that backup nickel, with Kenny Moore being the first team guy, and then Chris Lamons, who was also waived today, being that second team guy. Abraham and Lamons were in a little bit of a battle. Everyone was kind of thinking, is it going to be Lamons, who's that second team nickel? Is it going to be Abraham? Ended up being none of them. And they're rolling with only 5 corners, which I did think was a little bit shocking. And then the other rookie corner, Jalen Simpson. He's more of an outside guy. He was taking his reps outside. So he was less competing against a guy like Chris Lamons. And more so, it was like Daryl Baker Jr., who ended up making the roster right there. And Amir Speed, who was playing gunner, is kind of who he was mainly competing with. Simpson and Speed both got cut today, or were waived today. And Daryl Baker Jr. was the one that ended up making it, which I think some people are going to be a little bit unhappy with how that turned out, just because they remember several bad plays that Baker had last season before he was benched in favor of Juju Brents. But really, this summer, this preseason, he's kind of done everything they've asked at this point. And he's someone who's played in the system. So you're going with that backup outside corner. They went with the more reliable option in Daryl Baker instead of taking that chance on Simpson. Sean in the chat. Sean Conkright, how you doing, buddy? Like to see you here. Joshua Smith saying Treadwell hopes ends up on the practice squad, or was he fully let go? So at this point, everybody has been fully let go, which isn't to say they come back, but they're not really releasing what I know. In some of the reports on Twitter, it's like they announced that this so-and-so has been cut. The Colts are interested to bring him back on the practice squad. I think that could essentially be said for anybody. I'm sure there's some people on the team that the Colts are moving on from and aren't thinking about, but I think Treadwell is one of those guys in the receiver room that they could bring up on the practice squad if another team doesn't want him. I was kind of thinking about this before we went live here, how these old first rounders, or these former first round picks, kind of get second, third, fifth, seventh chances. Taven Bryan was kind of a guy who's being talked about a lot because he was this 10th defensive lineman that was kept over having a guy like Evan Hull as your 4th running back, or that 6th corner being one of your rookies. So Taven Bryan, I think, is a guy that is a former first rounder and would probably get some run somewhere else, despite kind of what we've seen in the past year and early in this preseason, kind of the film that he's put out. I think he would be a guy that teams would be interested in taking a shot on. So it makes sense that they're not letting him go and being subjected to that, even though I think a lot of Colts fans are definitely disappointed with his performance over last year. But yeah, Treadwell, there's a couple of guys on the receivers or in the receiving room that I think the Colts would be interested in bringing back. Let me just pull that up real quick. So we've got Ashton Doolin made it as the 6th receiver. So you're keeping 6, which is way more than they rolled with at the beginning of the year last year. At the beginning of the year, they ran with 4 receivers. At one point, they had 3 prior to week 1, after some Isaiah McKenzie roster juggling. But they ran with 4, and then they were just kind of elevating these practice squad guys. DJ Montgomery, Juwan Winfrey, Tyree Cleveland, these guys who are still on the roster up until today. Juwan Winfrey was put on IR, so he's not going to be a candidate to return back to the practice squad. DJ Montgomery, I would imagine the Colts would like to have back. I think there were some people thinking that he was kind of competing with Doolin for that 6th spot, because it's clear the staff likes him. He was getting some run with the first team during training camp. And then, yeah, I would say the next most impressive performer that they had Probably, I guess I would say wide receiver 7, essentially, in the big group was Laquan Treadwell. So if they're bringing back 2 receivers on the practice squad and they're not worrying about kind of these outside additions that might come help them, I think Treadwell would be a candidate there. Derby on YouTube saying Treadwell's going to get taken. It's a guarantee. Yeah, former first round picks. Like I said, they get all these chances. He's going to be on a roster or a practice squad this season, whether it's the Colts or not. Just kind of that pedigree that he has and that past that he has, which has been underwhelming. But then he goes out in preseason and he's having these performances where it's clear he's the best player on the field at the time. And albeit that was against third string guys, second string guys in some cases, but yeah, he definitely stood out and looked like he at least deserves to be in an organization getting some work in somewhere. Sarah saying she hopes that we put in some waiver claims tomorrow. I'm sure that's going to happen. Derby asking who we're going to be picking up on the waiver wire. This has been a super active time in the history of Ballard's tenure here, where that cut day happens, and this roster that you're seeing, they released this initial 53. There's probably going to be some changes to that. I would say 2 or 3 at the minimum. I don't know if I'm expecting a ton more than that, but kind of the positions that we're taking a look at with the waiving of their rookie corners and the waiving of Ronnie Harrison. Cody Lancaster's mentioning he's surprised about the Ronnie Harrison cut that happened yesterday. Yeah, it does leave your entire secondary pretty thin. So you're looking at guys, maybe Nick Needham from the Dolphins, corner who played slot last year after he came back from injury, but has some experience on the outside too. Just kind of this veteran guy that can maybe play wherever. Desmond King was cut, I believe, by the Texans today. He's another veteran guy. Experience with Gus Bradley back in with the Chargers, who plays some slot, can play some outside, and he can play safety in a pinch also. So maybe that's somebody that you're looking at. But yeah, really kind of adding to that cornerback room or the safety room if you find a body there that you like. I think maybe if you're doing that, you let go of a guy like Taven Bryan and go down to 9 on the defensive line. Or that would come at the cost of a guy like Danny Pinter and go back down to 9 on the offensive line. That's kind of where your numbers are at. But if you want to keep where your numbers are at, I think the first guy in the secondary that would likely get the boot would be someone like Darrell Baker. Josh saying, yeah, I would like to see some more from Treadwell, but he realizes that a lot of seen in preseason doesn't always translate well. We have a lot of experience with that, I feel like. Every season, there's kind of this standout wide receiver in the preseason who kind of jumps out at you and then ends up not really being much. At least Treadwell in this instance has played with first teams on real offenses in the NFL before. It hasn't been pretty, but he's done that. I think guys in the past that we kind of get excited about in the preseason, just going back to like Duron Carter, Mike Strawn for a couple years. These guys that don't really have a ton of experience or no experience at all come in, they're lighting it up in the preseason, then immediately they're going against the first string defenses. They're going against full game plans, and they just kind of get shut down and they're not producing at all. Treadwell, I think, he is the kind of guy who I think would excel in kind of these one-on-one situations against people that maybe aren't as great athletes as he is, because despite his lack of production, he is the former first-round pick who was incredibly athletic coming out of college. So when you're not going against these complicated defenses and you're not really scheming up a whole bunch of plays where you have to do a lot of thinking or reading, then I think your kind of one-on-one athleticism will shine through in those moments. So I think that's kind of why he was able to make those plays. And it was good to see that, and it's encouraging for him. And maybe he's a guy that can come back and play in a pinch, which is why he should be a good practice squad candidate. But yeah, I don't think that's the kind of production that you can bank on. Josh saying that he feels like a big move is going to happen at secondary because of all the cuts that went on. Yeah, I wouldn't say big move. I would say a move is probably likely to happen tomorrow as waiver claims come in. I think running with 5 at corner is a little bit iffy, but I guess it depends on how their practice squad turns out. So you've got Jalen Simpson, you've got Micah Abraham, you've got Chris Lamons who was cut, you've got Amir Speed. All these guys could kind of be put onto the practice squad. Maybe not all of them, but whoever sneaks through, get on the practice squad, and then you can elevate them onto game day, onto your active roster 4 times before they need to be on the roster. And if you're activating a guy 4 times, I feel like at that point you're going to have accrued some injuries, just kind of what happens throughout the NFL season. That roster spot will open up and they'll become a regular guy, just a rostered player. So yeah, I think maybe it's not going to be a big move. I think they do want to shuffle something there on the back end, maybe add a safety, maybe add a backup nickel. Because at this point, the only backup nickel you really have is Julian Blackmon. And if you're running in a situation where Kenny Moore goes down for any length of time, then you're really stuck on a thin safety room. If you're playing Julian Blackmon in the slot, and you've got Juju Brents and Jalen Jones outside, and then you've got Julian Blackmon in the slot, and then you're playing Nick Cross and Rodney Thomas, which I feel like at one point was a super optimistic pairing for Colts fans. They were excited to see those two back there in the defensive secondary together. I think at this point we've cooled on Nick Cross quite a bit, and we've kind of cooled on Rodney Thomas entirely. So not a situation where you want to see Rodney Thomas starting for an extended period at all. Gotcha. Derby also saying he was shocked about the Abraham cut. Yeah, we were kind of going back and forth, trying to think about which of these rookies would make it. I did my prediction show on Friday, where I was kind of looking at the situation. I kind of expected them to keep 6, and I had them cutting or waiving Jalen Simpson, and keeping Micah Abraham. And I had Micah Abraham beating out Chris Lamons, but I wasn't confident about it when I said it. Ended up neither of them made it. I just kind of thought they wanted to have that backup nickel kind of in place so they wouldn't have to do all that shuffling on the back end. But shuffling is kind of something that Chris Ballard's teams have done, and Steichen's team last year has shown they've been comfortable kind of shuffling players, especially in the secondary where they were struggling with numbers late in the year last year. So I don't think that they were too concerned about having kind of an overflow of corners and safeties on the roster. Derby's asking about that Nico Collins catch from that week 18, the first play of the game, that deep post route. Yeah, can't let that happen again. I believe Rodney Thomas was playing safety on that particular play, which is maybe why he's getting a lot of heat this offseason, because I feel like that play is just sticking out in everybody's memories. I don't remember which corner was on that side. It might have been Jalen Jones. Could have been Juju Brents also playing out there outside, which, yeah, is an area of concern. You've got these corners who don't have a ton of long speed. So those deep plays are kind of bound to happen if you don't have someone back there at safety that you can trust, which Rodney Thomas turns out we shouldn't have trusted him that play. Oh, yeah, asking about the entire day, yeah. Well, yeah, I think he moved out. Nico Collins did move around a little bit throughout that game, so he wasn't necessarily covered by one particular person, and the Colts defense hasn't been, under Gus Bradley at least, the kind of defense where they shadow a guy. So I really think that kind of falls on the entire secondary. I don't think he was in the slot too much being covered by Kenny Moore, but I think everyone outside of Kenny Moore is kind of who you're worried about anyway. Yeah, and then Texans coming week 1, Nico Collins, Tank Dell, and Stephon Diggs. So week 1's going to be a huge litmus test to kind of see where these DBs are at. Nobody's really content with the room right now, I don't think. But you've got Jalen Jones and Juju Brents both in their second year, and you're hoping they take that leap. It's really going to be hard to tell because preseason we kind of see what we see. Training camp we see just these reps in practice. I am excited to see them go against Live Bullets week 1 and kind of see how things turned out. And kind of the reason that Ballard and the entire staff has been bullish on this defensive back group. On the offensive line, they kept 10, which I was kind of wondering. I feel like there's a guy in here, in Tanner Bortolini, who is dealing with a toe injury right now. After this roster cut, so starting tomorrow, if they make a waiver claim, Tanner Bortolini could be a guy that they move on to an injured reserve designated for return, or onto the PUP list, just for a while he recovers with his toe injury. His toe injury may not be as severe enough to warrant him being out 6 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever designation they give him. But I think kind of likely being a guy that wasn't going to suit up a ton early, at least. I think your second team center has been Pinter, and it would continue to be Pinter. And he's a guy that they kept on the roster. So even if Tanner Bortolini was healthy, I'm not sure how often he would be active on game day. You've got Will Fries at right guard, and then backing him up directly has been Dalton Tucker all throughout preseason. Backing up center has been Danny Pinter all season. Dalton Tucker played some left guard in the third preseason game, so he can bounce inside, and Matt Gonsalves has also played left and right guard throughout training camp. So I think no matter how you shake it, without Bortolini, you still have 3 or 4 guys who can play on the interior. And then kind of looking at waiver wire pickups, Bortolini maybe is a guy that they throw onto one of those injury lists and they pick up somebody on the depth for offensive line, and still stick with 10 on the active roster. But yeah, he's definitely a guy that could make room for some of these new additions. I was surprised a little bit that they kept Tucker and Pinter and Bortolini. Earlier in the preseason, I was surprised I was thinking that they would keep one or the other of Pinter or Bortolini just because their skill sets have been so similar. The positions that they were playing have been so similar. But ends up they're keeping both of them for right now. We'll see how that injury turns out. Then that kind of emergence of Dalton Tucker. Looking at the roster, the only undrafted free agent that made it, Jason Bean, was maybe that other guy that we were thinking might make it. But yeah, he's the only one. So they're sticking with 10 on the offensive line. 10 on the defensive line. That's over a third of the team in the trenches, which I don't think is unusual for a Chris Ballard roster, right? It's going back. When I was doing my prediction on Friday, and I was making the prediction, going through the position groups, I had them keeping 5 defensive ends, with Isaiah Land being the 5th, which I think wasn't uncommon. I think I was kind of run of the mill with that. And then I chickened out at the last second. I knew that they've liked Taven Bryan more than the fans have liked Taven Bryan. I know Chris Ballard likes keeping 5 defensive tackles. They like to rotate those guys a ton. So 10 defensive linemen. I should have expected them to keep 10 going in. And Taven Bryan was always that 5th guy over someone like Jonah Laulu or Eric Johnson. Hey, Patrick, coming in with the super chat. Coming at us with a quote. He's kept the receipts. Ballard in February of 2024 says, "It's on me. Secondary will be addressed." And Ballard in August of 2024 says 53 has exactly the same guys as before. Yeah, so he has said in the past of these position groups, right? So I'm not going to come at him as much as people have. I know he's been kind of getting the stick for how he's handled the secondary and kind of how it's turned out. And I think a lot of that has to do with the guys that were available late throughout training camp. Your Quandre Diggs signing that happened, the Justin Simmons signing that happened, and kind of those low paydays that they got kind of made everyone think that he was just kind of neglecting the position as a whole. But yeah, it's the same guys. These position groups that he's dealt with was the receiver room 2 years ago, where he was banking on. This was the "I like our guys" quote, where he's loving and talking about praising all these young receivers that he had in the room, and saying that they were going to turn out all right. The season played out. The production was super low. Everyone was disappointed. Then he doubles down on it in the draft, or he overcorrects, and he takes Alec Pierce, and then he takes Josh Downs, and then the next year he's taken A.D. Mitchell, he's taken Anthony Gold. So he overcorrected on that. But last year he was talking about the offensive line. Everybody was kind of talking about how they needed to make additions on the offensive line. They didn't have enough. They didn't like the young guys, didn't think they could hack it. And then the offensive line turns out it worked out. Bernard Ryman kind of progressed beyond what everyone thought they would. Will Fry's the same way. And then you've got your solid starting five. So we'll kind of see whether it's the secondary, whether they follow the path of the wide receiver group of 2 years ago or the offensive line this year. I will say, of the three position groups, safety is, I would say, the least consequential that you're dealing with there. So if you're taking or running risks with your safety room and your corners is a little bit different. But I do think they like their guys at corner, and I understand them going with those young guys a little bit more than I do at safety. I think Jalen Jones showed a lot more than what people think. Juju, they've always believed in what he's doing. And then you've got Kenny Moore leading back there. Safety, I think has been kind of the linchpin for Colts fans this offseason. Rich saying heavy emphasis on trenches with this 53. Yeah, pretty consistent with how Ballard's built his 53s. Whole Abraham Harrison over Pinter, Bryan, and Baker Jr. That's what Rich would have changed. And a claim for Desmond King. Yeah, Desmond King is a guy that I brought up earlier as kind of a potential waiver wire ad, just because he has experience at a whole bunch of spots in the secondary. Experience with Gus Bradley and with the Chargers, and kind of this guy that comes into a young group that has struggled with communication both last year and throughout this summer. So that could definitely be an ad that we're talking about come 6 p.m. tomorrow. Patrick saying nothing different in the corners or safeties, no new hiring in the secondary coaches. Yeah. And then Patrick bringing up the offensive line, making that shift with Tony Sperano, which is a good point. No shift in the defensive backs room. Still got Ron Milas back there with the DBs. Actually, 1 second. I mean, this isn't going to be a big switch. But they did have Mike Mitchell coaching the safeties as the assistant defensive backs coach last year. They've switched that to Justin Hamilton has the reins there on the safety position. So it's not the big top line position group coach. It's more of an assistant switch that happened. Which maybe that's enough. Maybe it's not. I'm not going to hold out hope for these guys. I know Blackman's going to be a baller this year. I think they're super comfortable with him. Corner I'm comfortable with. It's really just kind of that free safety position. Yeah, and Patrick saying he hopes the Texans open the season with the exact same over-the-top play. Yeah, just to kind of force them into action, I guess. Once you get in the season, man, you wish that those moves came earlier, because when you get in the season, your opportunities to make changes really come or really get thin. If you see kind of maybe, I won't just say that first play of that Texans game, but if you see throughout the first 3 weeks kind of the secondary getting torched, communication issues on the back end, just flat out talent differential on the outside, then you're really going to, I think, feel the seat get a little bit hot for Ballard, just because having no secondary back there, you're just kind of all relying on that pass rush. And I think you can nullify a pass rush to a certain extent if you've got communication errors on the back end. So I think that's something they would take advantage of. And really, I think the defense needs to be a little bit more than solid going into this year for Anthony Richardson, so he has a little bit of leeway on offense. Nathan Comant's talking about Frank Gore Jr. I think, was waived by the Bills earlier today. Get some Colts legacy guys. There was also Jalen Wayne, which cousin of Reggie Wayne, was waived by the Packers. So if you're just going for if you're going for legacy guys, we've got that also. A lot of former Colts I saw hitting the waiver wire, which I mean, there's 90-man rosters. There's going to be a lot of people who have dipped their toes in a lot of teams. So Rock Ya-Sin, I think another guy cut by the 49ers today. I mean, if you're looking at the DB room thinking you need more depth, the Colts loved Rock when he was here. So I'm not going to bank on it, but I think that would be a fun addition to see him back with the horseshoe. Patrick talking about Taven Bryan in favor of another corner. Yeah. Taven Bryan has kind of been the redheaded stepchild to the Colts fans, especially throughout roster or since he got re-signed, I would say, in free agency this year, back in March. I'm not super surprised that they kept him over a corner just because of the pure numbers that Ballard likes to have on the defensive line. Rolling with 10's not uncommon for him, and especially rolling with 5 on the interior is not uncommon. And they really didn't have another guy that would be worthy of that roster spot ahead of Taven Bryan if they were dead set on keeping 5 DTs. Yeah, I do think they could make it work. I think going into week 1 of last season, they did have 4 defensive tackles. I think that shifted with McTelvin Agim on the practice squad bouncing up and down. So they were supplementing it in other ways. So maybe that's something they could do if they go after a claim. Nathan talking about bringing back Rock. So yeah, I mean, if they do sign Rock tomorrow, just as a hypothetical, and they part ways with Taven Bryan, to take that number down to 9, maybe Jonah Laulu, Eric Johnson, or maybe just an outside addition or guys that come back on the practice squad, and you can kind of manipulate your roster that way, bringing them up from the practice squad to the active roster at least 4 times. Adrian Amos, another name Patrick's bringing up. Yep. More love for Frank Gore Jr. Yeah. I'll be honest, I'm not super familiar with how he performed throughout preseason. Is this more you're excited about kind of his potential, or this is kind of a love letter to Frank Gore's time with the Colts? But Adrian Amos, yeah, another option for a veteran safety. I'm not super stoked about kind of what he has left in the tank. I think there are maybe some other safeties out there that would give you a little bit more. Terrell Edmonds was also released today. Could be a safety option for you. Drake was talking about this in the Horseshoe Huddle chat earlier today, talking about the conspiracy of what Taven Bryan might have over Chris Ballard. I don't think it's that far. I think Taven Bryan is a perfectly rosterable defensive tackle. Definitely been played out of position. I don't think he's a rosterable defensive tackle to play at one technique like the Colts have kind of insisted on doing, or maybe have done out of necessity. But yeah, I think maybe it's time for him to find another opportunity. Yeah, and Rich talking about that play happening again. Yeah, I think Patrick has made it clear he would be okay with that happening, just to kind of spur accurate things. Patrick talked about, Bruiser at running back, kind of what they don't have in their guys on the back right now. So like they've got Tyler Goodson. If they sneak Evan Hull onto the practice squad, Demetric Felton is maybe a guy they want to bring back after they waived him. Xavier Scott. These are kind of more finessey guys. Evan Hull's got some beef up the middle through the tackles. But other than Trey Sermon, I'm not sure they have a pure kind of lower your shoulder type bruiser back. Darth Raider in the chat saying Treadwell over Doolin, which is definitely possible. That piece that I wrote last week about Ashton Doolin, kind of the question that they would have to answer about him is they haven't seen him full time in that gunner role since his Achilles injury, or since he returned from that. So it's kind of trying to evaluate if he's that same guy after the injury. He could still be a pretty good gunner, but if he's not that kind of that all pro level that he was at in 2021, you kind of have to start to wonder whether or not that spot is worth a roster spot or not, or whether you go over with somebody who has kind of more firepower on the offensive side of the ball. Yeah, Patrick saying Treadwell's not a special teams guy like Doolin. It kind of depends on what you got going with your other with the other spots on the roster, like your back end. If they bring on an extra corner, your speed would be like this gunner type guy, so he could kind of fill the role of Ashton Doolin if they moved on from him. But yeah, I think Colts are willing to take the shot, roll the dice, and see if Ashton Doolin's that same guy. Because if you have that all pro level gunner on the outside, that's definitely worth that roster spot and worth that 6th wide receiver spot. I kind of think that wraps it up position by position. Didn't hit much on the tight ends, but it was kind of what everybody expected. Jelani Woods does go to season-ending IR instead of IR designated for return. Cameron McGrone was the one that ended up taking that spot, which was kind of like your linebacker 6, mostly a special teams guy. I think that says a lot about how the Colts are feeling about Jelani Woods and kind of how they imagine him contributing this season. When you've got Samson Ebukam, who's got an Achilles tear, who may or may not be back at any point this season, they're kind of taking a chance using that designated for return spot on him rather than going with Woods. In the same vein, they're using a spot on a 6th linebacker, a special teams guy, designating him for return, who might be back in a couple months for his injury instead of Woods. So they're just kind of saying the value of having Woods back for 3 regular season games is less than like a 30% chance of Samson Ebukam coming back for 1. So kind of take that how you will. Yeah, Patrick saying, yeah, just hang it up for Woods. I'm not sure if we're ready to go there yet. Since he's on IR, he's not. He's got like a 1.7 mil cap hit next year. It'll be a contract year for him. I think he'll be 27 next year. So you can at least carry him into camp on that 90-man roster. I don't think that's hurting you at all to do that, unless Shane Steichen and the new offensive staff are just ready to cut ties and move on and give up on that. But yeah, I would expect him to come back into training camp next year. But if they do that, the Colts essentially need to treat his situation as just any other camp body. Any undrafted free agent that you bring in, he's got to be like player 85 through 90 on the roster. Because if you're expecting anything more than that, or you're kind of waiting on him to become anything more than that, you're kind of setting yourself up and not letting yourself make other acquisitions that might help the room a little bit more. So I wouldn't say it's hanging up, but I would say he's hanging by a thread at this point. But yeah, guys, I think that'll do it. We'll be back tomorrow. We've got waiver claims need to be submitted to the NFL by noon, so the Colts have until noon to make decisions on who they're claiming. Those will be awarded at 4 p.m., I believe, 4 p.m. Eastern, the same time the roster cuts were due today. So we should get that info. That's NFL info. That I think will leak a little bit earlier than the Colts roster leak today. Kind of national outlets kind of get a peek of who's awarded what. So probably right at 4 we'll see that kind of leak out throughout Twitter, and then we'll see an official announcement from the Colts sometime later in the day. But I will be here 6 p.m. We'll say 6:30. I will let you guys know on Twitter, and I will schedule this live stream for tomorrow so you guys know. But yeah, we're looking at a 6:30 maybe start time tomorrow, and we'll kind of go over the waiver claims that they've made. Kind of if we expect anything else going forward. People that pass through waivers that might be on the practice squad, probably Wednesday or Thursday. So we'll go over all that. Yeah, that'll be my show tomorrow. But for tonight, make sure you check out all the coverage we've got over there on Indianapolis Colts on SI.com. Go to horseshoehuddle.com to check out the coverage there. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. You've got this show 3 times a week, and then you've got my buddies Drake and Andrew doing the Horseshoe Huddle podcast twice a week. So subscribe, hit the notification so you know when we're live. You can get in here and you can participate. Then you've got us on socials. Follow us on Facebook to keep up with our coverage there. We're also live on Facebook if you'd prefer to watch there. And then we're at Colts on _SI on Twitter or on X if you want to follow us there as well. But that's all I've got for you tonight. I will see you guys tomorrow.